Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into the source material covering Day 12 of the federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs.
Yeah, and look, the reports we've gone through, they paint a picture of a really intense day in court, possibly one of the most disturbing so far, based on the testimony described.
Absolutely. So this deep dive is specifically focused on unpacking what happened in court on that particular day, Day 12.
Right. We've pulled together news reports, some legal analysis, detailed recaps of the court testimony, basically, the stack of sources you shared to try and get a handle on the key events.
Exactly. Our mission here is to guide you through those important moments from Day 12. We want to help you cut through, all the noise and understand the specific evidence presented.
Because Sean Combs is facing some really serious federal charges here. We're talking sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, transportation for prostitution.
And it's crucial to remember, he's pleaded not guilty to absolutely all charges.
So based only on the information in these sources, we'll look at the key testimony, think about its potential impact, and maybe examine the strategies we can see emerging from both sides.
The goal is just to help you become well-informed on this complex case, straight from the source material about this specific day.
Okay, let's dive right in then. Day 12, according to the sources, kicked off with more testimony from Deontay Nash.
Right, he's the stylist and friend of Cassie Ventura. He was back on the stand, mostly it seems, for cross-examination by the defense team.
And his testimony from the day before had included something pretty significant, a claim that he personally saw Combs physically assault Cassie back in 2013, I believe.
Yeah. So, naturally, the defense, based on the reports, really focused their cross-examination on trying to undermine him, sort of chip away at his credibility.
How to do that?
Well, they seem to hammer on the timing of his statements, questioning why certain details he was giving now weren't mentioned in earlier chats with investigators or the prosecution.
Okay, so trying to suggest he maybe embellished or changed his story.
That seems to be the angle. But Nash's response, as reported, was pretty straightforward. He said he just gave details when they specifically asked him for them.
And did anything else notable come out during that cross-examination?
One interesting point Nash apparently made was that Cassie wasn't, super pressed about Combs seeing other women.
Oh, so not primarily jealousy driving things, according to Nash.
Exactly. Nash testified her big concern was how Combs' other relationships were hurting her career. That was her focus.
That's quite a specific distinction. Shifts the motive, doesn't it?
It does. And there was also this sort of poignant detail mentioned. Nash apparently helped Cassie pick out clothes for court because she was heavily pregnant, couldn't fit her own stuff. Actually, I think the report said she'd just given birth to her third child, that week.
Wow. Testifying under those circumstances, that adds another layer, definitely.
No kidding. Nash also, during his testimony, recounted some specific alleged incidents he said he witnessed.
Like what?
Like Combs supposedly storming into Cassie's place, yanking her hair, beating her. He testified Cassie hit her head on a bed frame, started bleeding.
And he said he tried to intervene.
Yeah, he said both he and another person, someone called Mia, tried to stop Combs. And when the defense pressed him, asking if Combs kept kicking Cassie even then, Nash reportedly said yes.
That's incredibly graphic testimony.
It is. So after Nash finished, the sources say a new witness took the stand. This person was identified only by an alias, Mia.
Right. She was allowed to use an alias for privacy reasons, and the judge apparently made it clear to the jury just because she has an alias doesn't mean her testimony is more or less valuable. It's just for protection.
Got it. And who is Mia? What's her connection?
The sources describe her as a former personal assistant to Combs, worked for him for a long time, actually, from about 2009 to 2017.
So quite a long tenure.
Yeah, and she eventually became director of development and acquisitions for his company, Revolt Films.
Okay. And how did she describe working for him?
She apparently started by calling it chaotic and toxic, marked by extreme highs and lows. She kept calling him Puff and said his mood just changed constantly.
And then, I understand her testimony got really, really difficult.
That's putting it mildly, based on the reporting. She detailed a whole series of pretty harrowing alleged incidents of abuse and what she described as coercive control.
What kind of things?
Well, she testified about routine verbal and physical abuse, subjected to coercive control, she said. And very disturbingly, she alleged sexual assault, including rape, just a few months after she started working for him.
Just a few months in.
Yeah, she said it left her feeling like trash. It's just awful stuff to read about.
Absolutely. What else? Did the control manifest in other ways?
Yes, she described really extreme control tactics, like being forbidden to lock doors in his homes, being deprived of sleep, sometimes for days.
Days without sleep.
Up to 5 days, she testified, said it led to a physical breakdown for her, and she alleged she wasn't allowed to leave his homes without getting permission first.
Wow. That sounds incredibly isolating and controlling.
Definitely. There was also testimony about alleged pressure to use drugs. She specifically mentioned being pressured to take ketamine.
And she talked about travel.
Yeah, she described traveling with Combs as being like traveling with a traveling medicine cabinet, said pills were kept in plastic bags or sometimes a Louis Vuitton pouch.
And she alleged physical violence against herself, too.
Yes. She recounted incidents where Combs allegedly threw things at her when he was angry. Phones. A computer.
A computer.
Yeah. She said he threw it at her head once on a movie set because the Wi-Fi wasn't working. Luckily, she said, it didn't actually hit her.
Good grief. What else?
A bowl of spaghetti, apparently, on at least one occasion. She also alleged he threw her against a wall once and threw her into a pool.
This is just relentless. Did she testify about getting injured?
She did. She described one incident in 2012. She tried to get her phone back from him in a bathroom, and she alleged he slammed the door on her arm repeatedly. Caused bruises, she said.
And another pool incident.
All right, this one in Turks and Caicos. She said she woke up in a hammock, and Combs allegedly dumped a bucket of ice water over her, started screaming, took her phone.
And when she tried to get the phone back?
He said she jumped on his back, and he allegedly just threw her backwards into the pool.
This testimony it's a lot.
It really is. And
Yeah.
one quote from her testimony that the reports highlighted really stuck with me. She talked about keeping these alleged attacks secret.
What did she say?
She said, "I thought I was going to die with this. I thought I would never have to tell anyone because it's the most shameful thing of my life."
That's incredibly powerful. Just speaks volumes about the alleged impact.
It really does. And her testimony didn't stop with her own experiences. She also talked about Cassie.
Right. She testified about witnessing Combs being violent or threatening towards Cassie Ventura, too.
Yes, on multiple occasions, she alleged. She mentioned specific places, the Cannes Film Festival in 2012, a party at Prince's house, that same trip to Turks and Caicos she talked about earlier.
So, overlapping locations with her own alleged experiences. Did she see injuries on Cassie?
She testified she did, specifically mentioned seeing a busted lip and bruises.
And she heard something, too.
Yeah, she recounted hearing an audio recording. On it, she alleged, you could hear Combs attacking Cassie. She described Cassie sounding panicked and hearing the sound of, well, someone being hit.
That corroborates some of Cassie's own testimony, doesn't it?
It seems to align, yes. Mia also described being at a movie premiere with Combs and Cassie. She said Combs was, like, digging his nails into Cassie's arm and talking low to her, menacingly.
Just constant alleged intimidation.
And Mia added this detail. She said it was actually part of her job description to take care of Cassie.
Take care of her? How?
Well, she specifically testified that she would bring Cassie gel for her bruises. The prosecution explicitly asked about that, according to the reports.
Bringing her bruise gel as part of the job. Okay, so let's connect some dots here based on the source material. Mia's testimony about witnessing abuse against Cassie on that same night Beyonce Nash described. That seems really important.
Oh, absolutely. For the prosecution, that's potentially huge.
Explain that for us. Why is that overlap so significant?
Well, look, when you have two witnesses, seemingly independent, describing the same alleged violent event
Right.
with similar details mentioning the same people being there, it makes both accounts much stronger. It corroborates Nash's testimony significantly.
And so it makes it harder for the defense to just say, oh, Nash is making it up,
Yeah.
if Mia is describing something very similar from her perspective.
Exactly. It adds a lot of weight. It suggests a consistent narrative backed by multiple viewpoints.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And Mia also talked about Combs' reaction to Cassie dating Kid Cudi briefly, right? How does that fit in?
It does seem to echo earlier testimony. Mia said Combs seemed heartbroken about it and that she herself felt something bad would happen.
Which connects back to Cassie's testimony, where she alleged Combs threatened to blow up Kid Cudi's car.
Precisely. It adds to this picture the prosecution is painting of alleged extreme possessiveness and potential for threats or violence when crossed.
Mia also talked about control over Cassie's career and finances. How might that play into the specific charges Combs is facing?
That seems directly relevant, particularly potentially to the racketeering and trafficking charges, depending on how the prosecution frames it. Mia testified, Combs allegedly decided everything about Cassie's career and appearance.
Total control.
That's what she described. She learned his company paid Cassie's credit cards, the place she lived, her cars. They were apparently under his company names.
So a real financial entanglement.
Yeah, and Mia added that Combs allegedly used this. He'd take things away, cars, jewelry, financial support if he couldn't reach Cassie. And he apparently used Mia to keep tabs on her.
If true, that sounds like a very deliberate system of control, extending beyond just personal relationship issues.
Right. And facing all this testimony, the defense strategy, according to the sources, seems pretty consistent.
Which is?
Primarily questioning the witnesses' credibility and motives, asking why they didn't report things sooner, suggesting maybe their accounts aren't completely accurate.
Or maybe trying to frame the relationships differently.
Exactly. Suggesting the relationship with Cassie, for instance, was mutually toxic or abusive. Or hinting that maybe witnesses were motivated by being around the money and fame associated with Combs. It's their counter-narrative.
Okay. Now, shifting slightly, Day 12 also involves some discussion about a mistrial motion the defense tried to bring the day before on Day 11. What was that about?
Right, that came up. The defense apparently asked for a mistrial because they felt the prosecution had crossed a line.
How so?
They accused the prosecutors of implying, without direct proof, that Combs was somehow responsible for fingerprints disappearing from the investigation into that fire that destroyed Kid Cudi's Porsche back in 2012.
Implying evidence tampering.
Essentially, yes. The defense called that implication outrageous behavior, arguing it was highly prejudicial since there was no evidence presented linking Combs to the missing prints.
And how did the judge rule on that?
The sources say she shut it down pretty quickly, denied the mistrial motion.
But did she address the issue?
Yes, she instructed the jury to completely disregard what the fire investigator had testified about the missing fingerprints specifically, basically telling them to strike that part from their minds.
So acknowledging the defense's point on that specific piece of testimony, but not finding it serious enough to stop the whole trial.
Seems that way. And remember, this ties back to Kid Cudi's earlier testimony alleging Combs was involved in a break-in at his home and the car fire itself.
And there was testimony from an LAPD officer too, right? Seeing a car linked to Combs' company near Cudi's house.
Exactly. So the prosecution is clearly trying to establish a link there, while the defense is pushing back very hard against any perceived overreach or unfounded implications, like the fingerprint issue.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Thinking about the broader trial strategy, especially regarding the racketeering charge.
Yeah.
How does testimony from former employees like Mia or Capricorn Clark, who testified earlier, fit in?
Well, that kind of testimony seems absolutely crucial for the racketeering charge. Remember, racketeering isn't just about one crime. It's about a pattern of criminal activity conducted through an enterprise.
Right.
So testimony from people who worked closely with Combs over long periods, like Mia or Capricorn Clark. Clark's testimony, for instance, describes some really extreme alleged threats and intimidation.
The sources mentioned being put in a warehouse.
Yeah.
A lie detector test. Threats about the East River.
Exactly. Really serious allegations of operating through fear. And Mia's testimony describing alleged coercive control, sleep deprivation, restricting movement, financial control adds to that picture.
So the prosecution might argue these aren't isolated incidents, but part of how the enterprise allegedly operated.
Precisely. They could use this to argue that threats, intimidation, and control were standard operating procedure within Combs' organization, which is central to proving a racketeering conspiracy. It goes beyond individual alleged assaults to the structure of the alleged operation itself.
That makes the employee testimony potentially very powerful for that specific charge.
Very much so. It provides context beyond, say, just the relationship dynamics with Cassie.
There was also that interesting observation in one source about a potential Diddy effect or Sean Combs effect. What was that?
Yeah, I was noting that sometimes even witnesses who describe really negative, even abusive experiences with him might still express some lingering affection or care.
Huh. That's complex.
It is. It just highlights the tangled emotions and complicated dynamics that can exist in these kinds of relationships and situations, even after alleged harm. It adds another layer of human complexity for the jury to consider.
Definitely. So wrapping up our look at Day 12, it seems like despite all this powerful, often disturbing testimony, the legal analysts mentioned in the sources still see a big challenge for the prosecution.
Yes, because, look, the testimony from Mia, from Nash, from others, It's incredibly compelling. It might convince a lot of people listening that Combs was abusive or controlling, as one source phrased it, a horrible boyfriend.
But that's not enough legally.
Not necessarily to convict on these specific federal charges. The prosecution has to prove sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, transportation for prostitution. They have to prove those specific legal elements beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which means connecting the alleged actions, the assaults, the control, the threats, directly to the definitions of those federal crimes. That's the high bar.
Exactly. It's a much more specific and demanding task than just convincing the jury bad things happened.
And just a quick logistical note, the sources mentioned prosecutors might actually finish their case earlier than expected.
Yeah, about a week early, potentially. Which could mean they feel confident they've put forward enough evidence with the witnesses they've already called to make their case on those charges.
Okay. So if we pull back from day 12, the main takeaways from the source material seem to be Mia's incredibly detailed and impactful testimony, which seemed to strongly reinforce Deontay Nash's earlier account.
Definitely. And we also saw the defense continuing its strategy of challenging witness credibility alongside that unsuccessful attempt to get a mistrial declared over the Kid Cudi fingerprint testimony issue.
The gravity of all these allegations is undeniable, and the legal process is clearly intricate, weaving together all these different accounts and trying to fit them into the framework of federal law.
Absolutely. This deep dive into the Day 12 sources, we hope, gives you a clearer sense of the specific evidence and arguments presented, helping you track the narrative as reported from the courtroom.
And as a final thought, something to mull over based on today's discussion. Consider how these detailed accounts of alleged power dynamics, control over movement, finances, even sleep. How might that kind of alleged environment impact someone's practical ability or even their perceived ability to simply leave a situation, even one described as abusive and coercive?
It raises profound questions about agency, control, and the psychological impact of the kinds of experiences detailed in this testimony, something worth reflecting on.